Hello and welcome to HT Explains, our new offering from the Hindustan Times, where we pick up a current development and ask some questions. What has happened? Why has it happened? What are the implications? Is there a way out? In the first edition of HT Explains, we are honored to be joined by HT's editor-in-chief Sukumar Ranganathan, and we are discussing Delhi-NCR's pollution and the politics of the pollution. So thank you for joining us. Let me begin by asking you a simple, rather open-ended question. Why is it that at this time of the year, Delhi is back to having bad to worse air quality?
You're right. This is the time of the year when we usually start talking about the air quality in Delhi. We all love talking about it. Journalists love talking about it. Politicians love talking about it. And every year we go through the same script. Nothing seems to change, and the air quality just seems to be getting worse. We'll have to understand that there are a lot of factors that are contributing to this. Some of these are factors which we can control, and some of these that are factors that we cannot control. And it's important to realize which ones we can't control. One of the primary ones which we can't control is location. If you look at Delhi, it's located pretty much at the foothills. It's the reason why many of our colleagues in the newsroom can take a weekend off and do a quick trip to the hills and back, but pretty much located at the foot of the hills, the head of the northern plains, and it's on the eastern edge of a desert, which, except for a little patch of water in between, actually extends all the way from Africa across the Arabian Peninsula and into Rajasthan, right, which is the Thar. And Delhi is on the eastern edge. And there are winds that blow from the desert. This is, I mean, there's something called desertification. Deserts have this tendency to spread, especially at a time when there is improper water management and everything else. Deserts have this tendency to spread. And a lot of the spreading happens through winds that carry the sand and the dust from the desert, which sort of blanket the regions adjoining them. For a long time, we had a natural barrier, which was the Aravallis. But over the last few decades, we have completely ravaged the Aravallis. There's a lot of illegal mining that's gone on there. Initially, there was legal mining, and then there is a lot of illegal mining that's gone on in the Aravallis. Even now, there is a lot of illegal mining that goes on in the Aravallis. There's a lot of development and construction that goes on in the Aravallis. Rajasthan and Haryana are the two main states where the Aravallis are. And last year in the Supreme Court, one of them, I don't recollect, I think it was Rajasthan, could have been Haryana, but one of the states actually told the Supreme Court that there are entire hills that are missing, which means the hills were there at one point in time, but now they're not there. They can't be seen. Surveys have shown that they're not there, which means they're gone. So that's one reason, right? I mean, the proximity of Delhi to the desert, its a location at the foothills, causes this problem to some extent. The second reason is the weather. We all know Delhi's weather. It's got two summers. It's got a hot summer and a wet summer. It's got a very brief spring, which all of us love. It's got an in-between autumn period, which is what we are going through now. And then it has a winter. It actually has a proper winter. I mean, not a winter, not the kind of winter that's there in many Western European or American nations, but it's got a decent winter. Things get cold. And as the temperature starts falling and as the winds stop, because winters are rarely windy, right? I mean, there are a few days when it's windy. Like I can look out of my room and I see this poor peepal tree outside my room waving. So there is a little bit of a wind today, which is why I have a feeling, I have not checked the measurement, but I have a strong feeling that the pollution, if you look at air quality, will be in the 200s today. It's unlikely to be higher because of the winds. We've all become experts, right? I mean, we can look at the wind, look at this, and we can say that this is what the AQI is likely. So there is a wind today, but usually this time of the year, there is no wind, and adds to build-up of various things, right? So that's the second thing. And these are pretty much two things that you can't control. You can't change where you're located, and you definitely can't change the weather.
In the weather.
But then we come to a lot of other factors, and many of these are things that we can control. One of these is, of course, vehicular emissions, right? The vehicles emit stuff that is not good for people or the environment, right? I mean, we have to accept that. Sure, there are varying degrees depending on the efficiency of the engine and the kind of fuel that is being used. Some vehicles are better than others. And obviously, a vehicle that runs on electricity is brilliant. but as yet we don't have enough vehicles that run on electricity in Delhi. In fact, Delhi is lucky because we have vehicles that run on CNG, which itself is the result of I think it was a 1998 move by the Supreme Court. See, I used to pass by Delhi through the 80s when I was in college, and it was a great city in all aspects except the air. I have visions of landing up at ISBT, which is the interstate bus terminal, early in the morning, and you could wave your hand and it would come back filled with black soot.
Wow. So this is not a new problem.
It's not a new problem. It was bad. And I think in many ways what helped Delhi back, and I think another year is 1996, when industries were forced to move out of Delhi by the Supreme Court. And back then I remember people actually took to the streets, right? There was a little bit of violence on ITO Bridge and Nizamuddin Bridge and everything else. And then, things went mad for a few days, but then they settled down. And these were all these small industries, many of them using petro coke and other things as fuel, pretty polluting stuff. And they were moved out. So none of this had been moved out in the 80s, which explains why Delhi's air quality in the 80s, because you had diesel vehicles, you had no CNG, you had a lot of these industries in there. But in 1997, the Supreme Court ordered that all public transport move to CNG. But that helped. It really helped. It helped retrieve a situation which was rapidly escalating out of control. Similarly, the 1999 move to push industries out helped. There are, of course, still industries that operate within the city, many of them illegally. You typically find out about them when there is a fire in one.
Fire accident.
Right? Yeah, we've written about several of these, right? I mean, there's a fire accident in one. There are unfortunate occasions when people have actually lost their lives because, they're just cooped up in one of these illegal factories which is producing something. But there are still illegal factories within Delhi, but by and large, the 1999 thing moved them out to some extent, right? So those two things helped. But vehicles, we still have a lot of vehicles. Delhi has more road length than all other Indian metropolitan cities put together. And Delhi also has more vehicles than all other Indian metropolitan cities put together. So we have a lot of vehicles. They contribute to it. So vehicular emissions is one, industrial is another. And then, of course, like all other cities, Delhi has a garbage problem. And we have a garbage burning problem. As much as you try to prevent people from burning garbage, there are always people who, and I don't know why, will insist on burning garbage, right? And there is a garbage burning problem that we have. Definitely not as significant as the vehicular emission problem, but there is this. And the other thing that has contributed over the last, again, I would say 2 decades, is the fact that for 2 decades now, Delhi has been a construction zone. You had the metro, which just built and built and built and then rebuilt, and entire areas were just taken up. And in some ways, it's brilliant because the metro has helped take a lot of cars off the roads. People prefer to use the metro, so it's good. And every big city needs a metro. I'm all for it. But the fact is, it changed Delhi into a construction zone. And construction is a big contributor to particulate matter. So you look at all these factors, there are a lot of these man-made factors, and these are factors that we can control. Now, we come to the extraneous man-made factor, because all that we've spoken of so far are intrinsic to Delhi: the traffic, construction, the garbage. Some people even blame the Yamuna. Right, and understandably so, because the Yamuna is one of the most polluted rivers in the world. And when a river is polluted, the air above it becomes heavier, and heavier air tends to carry particulate matter much more effectively than lighter air. So some people believe that the Yamuna also does its bit. It's possible. Scientifically, it's possible. I haven't actually seen the split, and we will come to that in a bit, because measurement is one of those things that I have a huge issue with. But there is an extraneous factor, and the extraneous factor is really the stubble burning, right? And my own theory is that Delhi's baseline pollution, and a lot of people tried to calculate it during the lockdown, which I think is a very suboptimal way of calculating it, because you should not be doing it during the lockdown. You can't be expecting everyone to be sitting in their homes, no movement of other than emergency vehicles, and all merchant establishments and everything else shut. That's not going to happen. That's impractical, right? I mean, that's like a town. So there will be movement. So you can't calculate your baseline in early April and say, oh, this is how clean Delhi should be. but you have to calculate. So my own
Yeah.
theory is Delhi as a baseline, which is probably not in healthy territory,
Hmm.
right? What is the baseline? Depending on the season, and we'll leave out the monsoon because in the monsoon it's brilliant.
Hmm.
Some part
Hmm.
of summer when the winds are there,
Hmm.
it's quite decent.
Hmm.
But when the weather is inclement,
Hmm.
which means it's a little cooler
Hmm. Hmm.
or there are no winds, wind speed is zero. Um, I would think that Delhi's baseline level would probably be in the hundreds, right? I
Hmm.
mean, on a very bad day when there's just zero wind speed and
Hmm.
everything else, it could be 150, 160,
Hmm.
whatever else.
Hmm.
And then you have other factors that push it over the edge.
Hmm.
And my own sense is stubble burning is one of those factors that pushes it over the edge.
Hmm.
So the people who are in defense of stubble burning, I mean, stubble burning is another.
Hmm.
It's the kind of thing that we should do an HT explains on, because
Hmm.
our own
Hmm.
reporting has shown that the fundamental reason for stubble burning is because of the way Punjab manages its water. Right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's a fascinating study on crop cycles and when they crop and
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah.
But the people who defend stubble burning say that we are
Hmm.
not responsible for the bad air in Delhi.
Hmm.
True to some extent because the baseline itself is bad.
Hmm.
But what the stubble burning does is it makes the bad worse.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then we begin to take notice.
Yeah.
Right? And that is exactly what happens at this time of the year.
So, from what I hear from you is that there is this mix of complicated factors. You have the weather, you have the location, you have the vehicular presence and emissions, you have industrial emissions, and Delhi having been a construction zone over the past 2 decades, and then this extraneous factor of stubble burning. So, what it clearly requires is a very comprehensive and holistic policy approach. And this is where I'd like to get in this bit about how the governance and administrative structure in a way complicates resolving this issue. So you have, and the Chanakya column in Hindustan Times on Sunday mentioned the multiplicity of power regimes, but you have Delhi, you have the center, Haryana, and UP, and West UP is an actor here being run by the BJP. You have Delhi being run by AAP, and you have Punjab being run by Congress. And this leads to a degree of political competition, which prevents a holistic plan from emerging and being implemented. How do we get around this?
Yeah, this is a great question. And like many great questions, it doesn't really have an answer. Right? Because it's see in India, especially in India in 2020, everything is political, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you pick an issue, there are sides to the issue that
Hmm.
people take depending on their political affiliations.
Hmm.
But this issue of air pollution in Delhi is extremely political because of the multiplicity of regimes that you have. No one seems to want to do anything in partnership with anyone else. Every state, every administration takes an antagonistic attitude to this. So you have Punjab that claims it's not stubble burning. You have Delhi that points the finger to Punjab without really looking at all the other issues that it needs to look at. You have the center, which should actually be managing the whole thing and coming up with a plan, but you know that the Delhi government and the central government don't really see eye to eye. So there is a lot of gamesmanship that goes on there. You have Haryana, which is ruled by the BJP. So they don't. And what you really need is, for want of a better word, what Hindustan Times in a news report referred to former Justice Madan Lokur, right? I mean, it called him Delhi's informal air commissioner.
Yeah,
You
Commissioner.
actually need a formal air commissioner. You need someone who has all the agencies, the responsible agencies from the various states and union territories reporting into him, who can actually put together a plan on how to deal with pollution in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term. And you can do all three. But it requires political will. See, even emergency measures are sacrificed at the altar of political exigency. The classic example of this is diesel. Right? Diesel generator sets are not allowed to be operated. You know this in a certain when things go bad for a certain period. But Haryana has invariably been exempt from this. And the reason is many of the industries as well as the residential complexes, these huge glass and chrome condominiums where people live, depend on diesel generators. When you are driving through Gurugram the next time and you're passing by these condos, please look at their roofs. You will see spires of diesel fumes rising. And they are significantly responsible, if you ask me, for air quality deteriorating. But they are exempt from this. And the reason they are exempt from it is because the Haryana government obviously doesn't want to offend those people or antagonize those people who are living in those condos. So it says, no, but you can't keep exempting people all the time, right? I mean, so on the one, you need short-term measures, and the short-term measures mean coming down hard on stubble burning. Short-term measure, actually, I would even think of a congestion tax, right? Anyone who wants to bring a car into Delhi from any of the neighboring states pays a tax. Anyone, I know it's going to be messy to monitor, but it has to be done. And these days you have ways and means to do this using tags, right? I mean, you have the fast tags that you use for other reason. You can use them for something like this. Within the city itself, because there are parts of Delhi which are worse off than others. So we should have an agency which has the powers to say that if you want to enter central Delhi with a vehicle, you have to pay this amount, right? And we should give people the opportunity to pay it on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, or on a daily basis. Right? But you should do it. And see, some people will still pay and use or pay and pollute. Some people might actually say that, okay, let's try and see whether we can do something else. And you have a golden opportunity right now, because a lot of people have discovered that they don't need to move around. A lot of shopping is moved online. A lot of people work from home. So you have to have those immediate measures, but at the same time, you also have to have some medium-term measures. You have to have some long-term measures. A medium-term measure would be, how do we ensure that at least 20% of the vehicles which are plying on Delhi's roads are electric vehicles? I know that at the national level, we have an EV policy and other things, but do you really have a campaign? And when I mean a campaign, I mean something as powerful as the Swachh Bharat campaign, right? I mean, which worked to a great extent. I know it has its critics, but you had a campaign. It was pushed forth very aggressively. So can you not do something like this? Because to me, a campaign like that shows that there are things you can do which actually makes things better. And do something like that to get 20% of the vehicles as electric vehicles, and offer subsidies, do other things, make sure there's enough of a manufacturing for electric base for electric vehicles. It will also give a boost to Indian manufacturing. So that's at the medium term. And of course, I also think we need to keep investing in science and research when it comes to bad air, because there are ways in which you can deal with stubble, right? I mean, it's unproven yet. PUSA, for instance, the institute at PUSA has come up with these chemical tablets. Doesn't do any harm. I mean, all organic stuff which you can use, which accelerates the dissolving of the stubble from 3 months to 28 days. Our own reporter wrote about it. Interesting. I mean, now farmers will say 28 days is still too much.
Too long.
But it's still an improvement over 3 months. But what I'm saying is we'll have to keep investing in things like that. We have to study, because on a real-time basis, we need to have the agency that is empowered to take a call on Delhi's pollution. It should be able to look at a dashboard and say, so much of it is coming from vehicles, so much of it is coming from stubble, so much of it is coming from road dust. So what can we do to address these issues? And you almost have to do it on a real-time basis. You have to have a forecasting on a real-time basis. You need to have a management on a real-time basis, and you need to have enforcement and monitoring on a real-time basis.
I think that's a very comprehensive roadmap, and I do hope somebody in government, or rather 4 or 5 governments, which are all stakeholders in this, are listening to you. And what I pick up from you is that there is a need for political credit sharing. As long as all sides don't have a sense that they will not be blamed, and in fact they will get credit, we won't see that cooperation which will be required for many of the measures that you mentioned. The second, I think, is the behavioral nudge that you were talking about, which can come from both awareness building but also policy initiatives. And the third are hard policy choices, and these will require trade-offs. And these will require trade-offs where certain constituents will have to change the way they have been working. And I think there has been a reluctance to make those hard trade-offs, especially with regard to stubble burning. I cannot let you go without asking you one final question. We are over time because there is now nobody who knows and or who has tracked COVID more than you. And for those who haven't followed it, please do read what you need to know today. Sukumar sir's daily column on COVID-19. Air pollution is also particularly dangerous this year because we are in the middle of a pandemic, right? What does science tell us about the link between pollution and COVID-19? And what is it that we need to worry about?
See, there's no in-depth research. I mean, is there a study of 100,000 people that tells us that air pollution makes it worse? No, there isn't. But there are studies of smaller groups. And what these studies, and this is true of almost many aspects of many aspects of COVID, right? I mean, even the solidarity trials of WHO covered only 11,000 people. But what studies of smaller groups have showed us is that air pollution, as one would expect it to, makes things worse, right? Plain and simple. But I have a larger point to make, which is I think we are not being smart in tracking the long-term impact of what air pollution has done to the lungs of every Delhi resident over the last 10, 15 years. It's not too late. We have a lot of fine medical establishments in this country. AIMS is headed by a gentleman who is supposed to be one of the smartest
Leading pulmonary specialist. Yeah.
in this country. No one knows more about respiratory ailments than he does. If we were to launch a study which covers 50,000 people, 70,000 people, 100,000 people, and track them over the next 5 to 8 years,
And see what's happening to their lungs.
get on what is happening to their lungs and what the air is doing to their lungs across age groups, across people with what is now a famous word, comorbidities, right? I mean, you do it across the section, you will find it. Because, see, we all know that COVID, based on these smaller researchers, is bad for the lungs. I mean, air pollution exacerbates COVID. That is what we know. No direct link, but it just makes things worse. But if we were to track for the next 5, 7, 8 years, or even 10 years, what air pollution alone is doing to our lungs, I think it would be a very interesting study. It would be our own study, because I don't think, Delhi is not similar to Los Angeles. Delhi is not similar to Beijing. I know these countries have all had their own problems with smog. But our problems are our own. They're different in a different way. And we'll have to tackle it in an interesting way.
Thank you so much for providing us that explanation on why Delhi goes through this annual cycle of bad air and what the complicated factors, natural as well as man-made, intrinsic to Delhi as well as external to Delhi, which contribute to it, and measures that can be taken. I thought that was very comprehensive. That brings us to the end of this edition, our first edition of HT Explains. We will be back with another edition soon. Thank you so much, and do keep tuning in to and watching all videos on hindustantimes.com. Thank you.